Spoilers Club number 2. I'm very excited to be able to be talking about the Kaiju Preservation Society with John Scalzi. John is unfortunately sick with the Rona, and so there may be coughing and or brain farts. So that's a thing that's happening now.
Gonna shake that money in my monkey bank.
Oh, hey, thank you for the resub cipher.
It's always exciting being highly infectious.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. So yeah, we are here. I was delighted when you came to my city for the first stop on your new shiny book tour, and you actually said that you would be on this show with me, which was exciting. So Kaiju Preservation Society by John Scalzi. The bad guy is the bad guy at the very beginning. So there's the first spoiler.
Yeah.
So, I know you've told it a million times, but just in case, tell us about how this book came to pass. You can sum it up if you want. I just think it's a fascinating story because we are talking about how you wrote this book, and the start is an interesting story.
Sure. I mean, the story, it never gets old. I was trying to write a book in 2020, and it was meant to be as I tell people, it's meant to be a dark and gritty sort of political thriller set in space. And it turns out that 2020 was a terrible year to try to write anything that was sort of dark and gritty and cynical and a political thriller, because the world was not a happy place in 2020. Not like today where everything is perfectly fine.
I don't have enough booze here, John.
I'm sorry. I didn't make 2022. I just live in it. It just wasn't working for me. I mean, I kept trying to write it, and two things were happening. The first was that I just kept being distracted by how awful 2020 was. And the way that I like to explain it to people is that I got my start in journalism, and I had an opinion column for a newspaper. So literally, my job was to look at the news and tell people what I thought about it. And so if that is sort of your first writing, practice, it's very hard to pull yourself away from that, particularly in a year like 2020. And the other thing is that usually, no matter how bad the world is, I can go into the book that I'm writing or the world that I'm creating and sort of have a little bit of an escape. But if you're writing a dark and gritty political thriller when the world's on fire, you're not really giving yourself much of escape. Yeah. So it was just very, very difficult to write. And then in November and December, I got sick. And oddly enough, I thought it was COVID, but all the tests that I took said that it wasn't. But the thing that was very specific about it was literally I just couldn't think. Right. If I tried to have a deeper thought than cheese is good, then it really wasn't happening. And currently having COVID at the moment, I can tell you that the brain function that I'm having right now is still a higher brain function that I was having in November and December of 2020. Like, I am currently writing a book and I feel like I can write it. I'm just writing it a lot slower than I was before. But in November and December of 2020, I just couldn't write at all. I was just like sitting there, vaguely panicking.
Right.
And then 2021 happened and I was like, well, January starts and I'll start writing again in January. So January 4th, I wrote 250 words, and I thought that was a good start. And then January 5th, I wrote 500 words, and I'm like, I like this, progression. And then January 6th happened, and then I didn't write anymore until I was like, I'm not going to write anymore until January 20th because I need to make sure that
Oh yeah, sorry, I was just realizing you stopped at January 6th, right? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry. And then once January 20th happened, then I waited another week just to be sure, which was not something that I ever had to worry about before.
Yeah.
welcome to our current situation. And then, I started writing again, and I got like 3,400 words into a new chapter, and everything was going great. And, I saved that new chapter twice, and I came back the next day to find it, and it wasn't there. Despite the fact that I had saved it, that I had uploaded to a cloud, that there was local saving and everything else like that. And at that point, I was just like, I am done, right? Because this book was clearly cursed.
Yeah.
And so I had to tell Patrick, my editor, I was like, look, I just can't do it. I loathe myself when I'm writing this book, and I hate it and everything that's come to represent my brain. And he was actually quite sympathetic. And so, despite the fact that it was due very soon, and that it had to be, it was going to come out in October of 2021, he's like, we're taking it off the schedule. We'll figure something out. Don't worry about it. And then I was just like, when I went to go take a shower, and then when I done with the shower, or as I was in the shower, my brain was like, oh, hey, while you were panicking about this book you were never ever going to write, I've been thinking about this completely different other story, and it's called the Kaiju Preservation Society, and here it is. Whoa! And like literally the whole thing downloaded in my brain. And I immediately got out of the shower, and I sent back email to Patrick, and I'm like, hey, remember how I said I wasn't going to have a book? Give me 6 weeks, you'll have a book. And I got it into him 5 weeks later. And that's how that book came to be.
So one of the things I wanted to ask is, why did you only give yourself 6 weeks?
Because I wanted to hit the deadline for getting the book out in October.
Oh.
Because they had a John Scalzi book for October. And I was like, okay, well, if I get it done in 6 weeks, and we can still hit that. It will be tight because we have to do all these other things, but it can still happen. Now, the funny thing is, of course, I turned it in the book, and then Tor started looking out towards October, and they were like, you know what? We're not 100% confident that things are not going to be terrible in October, which turned out to be the correct call, because October, if you remember, there was paper shortages. Mm-hmm. And then we had, I can't remember if it was Omicron or Delta. Honestly, all of these COVIDs look alike at this point. And they, but whatever it was, we were having a peak then as well. So touring would have been completely out of the question. And so they were just like, yeah, we're going to move it to March, and we think it'll do better then. And I think that as it turns out, they were correct. So I got the book on time to come out in October, and then Tor was like, no, we're going to move it to March. I was like, fine, because I turned it in so late anyway, like barely getting it on time for October, that I absolutely did not blame them if they wanted to move it. And like we said, March rolled around, things had evened out just enough that I could do an actual tour, and I could do all the publicity and promotion that we would want to do, and that of the particular type that I'm good at. And so it worked out real well. And I was mentioning to you prior to going live that there is real irony that I was on tour through March, and then on the weekends in April and May, and didn't get sick once, despite, in fact, being in front of literally tens of thousands of people over the course of, 3 months. And then I'm home by myself for 3 weeks, and I get sick. So there's irony.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Daniel wants to know, did you have your own worries, hesitations about including the pandemic in the story?
No, not really, because part of the whole story was that it was taking place in contemporary time. And you can't do a story about contemporary time and not actually have COVID in it. Now, the thing about it is that as quickly as possible, I fled from our plague-ridden world into an alternate universe that had monsters in it.
Yes.
But yeah, no, you had to address COVID. And it wouldn't have made sense not to. And because I knew I was writing contemporary sort of thing, and I knew that it was going to either come out in October or March, one of the two, that it would be close enough that it wouldn't feel like, it's like it would be current time as opposed to ancient history. Now, what that means is that eventually Kaiju Preservation Society is going to feel dated. It's going to be like, oh, and this is the first of the COVID era of science fiction.
Yeah.
But you know what? I'm going to worry about that 20 years from now, right? Today, people seem to like it and like the fact that it actually references a period of time that they all remember.
Yes.
And that it was able to incorporate it into the protagonist's story and so on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So these are questions I've wanted to ask you for a while. You have...
That's not ominous at all.
So you, to my knowledge, the first time I noticed you including a non-binary or gender hidden character was the God Engines, when you had a sex worker who was not gendered. And then you did Lock-In, where the main character was clearly not gendered. And you had two narrators. You had Amber Benson and Will Wheaton, depending on how people wanted to view that main character. And you've done it again with Jamie in Kaiju Preservation Society, but you only had Will Wheaton narrate. Was there an option for a female narrator and you decided not to do it? Or what happened there? And let's go bigger into your choices. And this is not a asshole, there's got to be a reason for it, but it is a I'm curious about that choice.
With regard to the audiobook, hold on. With regard to the audiobook, I think it was basically just an economic decision on the part of Audible.
Right.
They're like, people like Will Wheaton narrating you, so we're going to go with Will Wheaton. I'm pretty sure that when we do the third book in the Head-On series, or the Lock-In series, that they will continue to do Amber and Will, because they've already started doing that, and there's no reason not to continue doing that. I think they just decided not to do it this particular time. And that's fine. I mean, the Interdependency series was also narrated by Will, and two of the three protagonists of that series were women, and people didn't seem to have a problem with Will narrating. So I think from Audible's point of view, and I haven't really spoken specifically to them about this, so I'm just speculating. I think that they were like, if it's a John Scalzi book, they're going to be happy with Will regardless. Yeah. And I think that they're not wrong. It was a New York Times bestseller in audio. So they sort of have the economic data going with them. With regard to like gender non-specific characters, I actually had one prior to God Engines.
Okay.
It was a smaller character in the Android stream. There's a character named Sam.
Oh, okay.
And Sam was never gender specified in the course of the story. And in that specific case, it was because I just wanted to see if I could do it, and whether anybody would eventually try to figure it out. And it took a while before I started getting the emails going, "Hey, is Sam a dude or is Sam a woman? I need to know." Right. And this was 2006, where at least in my experience, which, coming in as, your basic cis straight white dude, non-binariness in a general sense was not something that was in the mainstream conceptually at all. I didn't necessarily think of Sam being non-binary, just merely that I had not asked the character which sex they were, right? With the God Engines, the character, it's kind of interesting because that character, and this is again more spoilers, the world of the God Engines is hugely patriarchal. And so the sex workers, my belief is that they started off male, but the talents that they have which are the magical medallions that specify which sort of magic they get to do, allows them to change their gender according to the wants, needs, and desires of the person that they're servicing. And I don't go into great detail about that because it was a novella and I didn't want to think about it too much,
Right.
Because I had other things to do. But if I ever were to expand that universe, I would have to go in and think about that more. With Chris Shane and Lock-In and Head On, it was very specifically, look, Chris is in or presents to the world in a 3 body.
Mm-hmm.
And Chris has been locked in since they were 2, right? And so gender expression, I believe, for a lot of people who are Haydens, particularly the ones that were locked in early, is probably hugely more fluid than it would be for people who are not locked in, who in their day-to-day expression of the world get gender stereotypes reinforced on them so much, right? And especially when you're presenting in a body that does not necessarily have to be gendered. There are certainly gendered threeps. Why wouldn't there be? And for the people who feel strongly about gender, that is something that they can pursue. But my suspicion is that whatever gender Chris is, and it was never specified to me in my head, and I never, went out of my way to figure it out. They did not necessarily make that part of their public identity. So for the purposes of the book, it didn't make sense to do that. With regard to Jamie, it was just, I started writing it and it just never got to a point where I really needed to specify the gender of the character. And so I was like, I don't need to. It's not relevant to the story. Mm-hmm. And so I'm just not gonna. So there you have it. Now, there are other specifically non-binary characters. Neve is a non-binary character.
Yes.
And that is very specifically, Neve uses they, them pronouns and stuff. And it's been very interesting because I've gotten people who believe that Neve is trans, which maybe Neve never told me if they are. Mm-hmm. And then there are people who send me errata. They're like, by the way, Neve is, you used they, that should be she. And I'm like, you just weren't paying attention, were you? Because Neve is consistently they, them all the way through.
Yeah. Yeah. Daniel wants to know if you've told all the stories in the world of Kaiju Preservation Society.
I don't know. I mean, with the exception of the interdependency, I've never written, I've never started off a book with the idea that it might be a series or not, right? Literally, the interdependency was the first time I was like, there's going to be more than one book in this series, right? All the rest of them were, here's this book, and then after the book came out, people decided they wanted more, and Tor came to me and said, hey, can you write more of these? Here's some money. At which point I was like, sure, you're going to pay me money. I like money.
Yes.
So there's nothing in the current contract that I have that specifies a Kaiju sequel. That said, a whole lot of people want Kaiju sequels, and I'm not opposed to it. But then the question comes, when and how does that fit in with everything else that I have to do? Because I have to do a Lock-In sequel. I have to do another Old Man's War sequel. And then, there are other stuff that I have to do. And then I have some standalones including the current book that I'm writing, which is not in any existing universe. But so it's a standalone. And then we just have to see how people respond to all that sort of stuff. I'm not opposed to writing more in the Kaiju universe. I think there's much more that can be done in the Kaiju universe. And certainly it's been optioned for TV. So if it gets to the point where they're actually in production, I will definitely write a sequel so we can have it available when the TV series comes out, because I'm, I'm motivated to capitalize on those things when they happen. But right now there's nothing officially scheduled, and we'll just have to see where it fits into the schedule.
Right. Yes, the schedule.
The schedule, the schedule.
I do. Couldn't you just self-pub a book in the sequel, in the series that your publisher didn't want? Technically, yes.
Yes.
I could.
Yeah. I think the thing I always get with the self-publishing is people are correct that self-publishing is an option that can be done. I think that people don't appreciate how much work self-publishing is.
Yeah.
And this is one of the reasons I have so much respect for people who self-publish, because you literally have to do everything. You have to do the editing, you have to do the copy editing, or you have to farm it out. You have to pick the right people, and you have to do all the things you need to make sure
and
that
you're still the project lead.
Yeah, you're still the project lead all the way through. And then once it comes out, then you gotta flog it, and you have to be the PR and marketing department as well. And when people talk to me about wanting to do self-pub, and I self-pubbed Old Man's War and Agents of the Stars way, way, way back when, right? So it's not something that I don't have experience in. But the thing is that I always say to people is I am literally the world's laziest person, right? I have, through my life, striven to design my life so that I have to do as little as possible in order to eat and survive. And self-publishing qualifies as way too much work.
Yeah.
So to the people who really do make an effort on it and do a really good job of it, I stand in awe and I salute them, because that's just amazing. And I'm so glad I have a publisher.
Yeah, I think my biggest thing is I'm one of the few authors who's just like, let me work with an editor. I know that my book is better after an editor has their hands on it.
Sure.
I turn in messes, and the idea of self-pubbing a novel length thing just makes me feel like I'm walking out of the house without a shirt. It's like I can't. Right. That would just really freak me out.
Right. Well, and I think it's important as writers that you understand what your preferences are and what works for you. You absolutely need an editor. I need an editor and a book designer and a publicity and the distribution people. And I think that's worth knowing what it is that you want to do and what you are good at in the book publishing process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one thing's interesting about you saying that you could write the book in 5 weeks is something I've been trying to wrap my brain around, which is trusting in yourself without, I don't want to sound too woo kind of here, but it's like you said, your brain was clearly just working away at this neat idea that you didn't even think about. And a lot of times I will sit around and I'll fret about a plot for days.
Sure.
And then when I finally sit down to write it out, it is the process of writing that unveils it for me. And I realize it's the old saying of throwing myself off the cliff and building my wings on the way down.
Sure.
In the whole trusting your subconscious to actually be there for you. And I don't really know what my question is, but I'm curious if you have anything else to say about this, because it's something I've been trying to trust myself more lately, is essentially what I'm saying.
I mean, I'm one of the very few authors I know of who has never had imposter syndrome. Do you know what I mean?
John, you're a friend, but damn you.
I know. But this is the thing is like when I was 14, I figured out I wanted to be a writer. And I figured out I wanted to be a writer because I figured out that writing was easy for me in whatever easy means for a 14-year-old person. And everything else was more difficult. And not only was it easier for me, that I was doing it better than everybody else who was making effort to do it. Right. So for me, again, world's laziest person, that was the path. It's like, you're going to become a writer because you can do this shit, and you go towards it. And then when I was 14 and I announced to the world, it's like, hi, I'm going to be a writer. Like, literally everybody's like, yeah, no, that actually makes real good sense for you. Right. And so there was never a point in the development of myself as a writer where someone was like, no, this makes no sense for you. You should go and you should go and become a biologist or something like that. Right. There were people who, there were always people who were like, you're not as good as you think you are. And my response, particularly in my young ego-filled days, is like, haha, watch this. But because that was never both a monomaniacal drive to become a writer and taking full advantage of all the privileges that I had as me being me, meant that there was never a particular point where I was ever caused to doubt my abilities or my skill. So, and then went from there and I went into journalism, where literally they're like, I don't care how you're feeling. You have a 3:00 deadline, and if you miss it, I will come over and I will strangle you.
Yeah.
And so, having that journalism background and just hit the deadline, you're always producing copy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when it came time to writing fiction, it really was just like, by that time I'd been writing professionally for years. I knew I could write. I was confident in my ability to write. I didn't know if I could structure a novel, which is why I wrote a practice novel first. And that was Agents of the Stars. And that was like, well, no, I guess I can do this. And so there was just never any doubt. And so that's good and bad. I mean, the good part of it is that there's never been a part where I've been like, oh crap, what am I doing? The flip side of that is when it has happened. Like I said, I talk about the 5 weeks it took me to write Kaiju Preservation Society.
Mm-hmm.
But that also came after the end of almost a year of not writing this other novel, right?
Yeah.
And just grinding and grinding and grinding and grinding. And never at any point did I feel like I had lost my ability to write and I had a dark night of the soul about being able to write. It was specifically, what the fuck's going on with this particular story? What is going on? And it really was, I had to actually step outside of 2020 to realize it's like, oh, this explains a lot.
Yeah.
So 5 weeks is, but that's the other thing is that 5 weeks, and you're going to hate me and everybody will hate me. And what can I say? 5 weeks is not that unusual time for me to write a novel. I mean, Red Shirts was 5 weeks, right?
Mm-hmm. Even with the 3 epilogues?
Yeah. Well, no, the 3 epilogues were, I wrote Red Shirts. And I think that was like 4 or 5 weeks. And then I was like, this is good. It's too short. And then I wrote the 3 epilogues in another week.
Gotcha.
Fuzzy Nation was like maybe 6 or 7 weeks, right? The shortest I've written a book was Consuming Fire, which I wrote in 2 weeks, which I don't really recommend for anybody.
Oh my God.
And that was literally just me looking at my schedule and being like, oh, it's June 4th and the book is due on the 20th. I guess I really should start writing it now. But I'd been thinking about it for so long that it, at that point I wasn't writing, I was typing, right? But the average time that I've taken for pretty much any of my novels, and there will be some people who are like, I knew it, because they think I'm a facile and surface writer, is usually a couple months. 2 or 3 months is usually the time that I get stuff done. And a lot of that is, like I said, the journalism training of just sitting down and writing. But part of it is also, that's how I put things together. I write on the fly.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also edit on the fly so that when I'm done, I just send it in. And my stuff is, generally speaking, very close to the final product. Over the course, I think I've had 16 novels at this point. I think the number of pages of notes that I've had for all of them combined is like 3 or 4.
Wow.
Yeah. But again, that's two things. I mean, one, all that time with the practice of writing, also the fact that I edit along, and also the fact that I think that Tor and Patrick in particular are like, he does what he does. There's no reason to mess with it unless there's a reason to mess with it.
Right.
And there's been a couple times where it's like, you need to go in and fix that. Like, there is something, I gave him the first part of the current novel, and he's like, I have a question about this first chapter. And I'm like, all right, I'll go in and fix that, you know. So I do get edited, but usually the things that I need to be edited about, I can fix fairly quickly.
So you said you write it on the fly. Do you outline it all?
No.
Wow.
No. And again, that's a personal preference. You know, it's, and I know people who do outline and they absolutely swear by it. And I have a friend who I know writes like 40,000 word outlines. And I'm like, why would you do that?
Yeah. I don't get that.
Yeah. But it works for them, and if it works for them, then it works. You know, this is the thing that I keep trying to get into people's heads about process. What's the right process? The right process is the one that gets you a book at the end of it. And if it means writing a 40,000 word outline, then write the 40,000 word outline. If it means just sitting there and making it up as you go along, then do that. If it's somewhere in between, then absolutely do that. The whole point of developing a writing process is not to do the one true path, but to find whatever path that works for you. And I think that this is part of the problem has always been people are like, tell me the one true path. Tell me the one thing that works.
The magic bullet.
Yeah, dude, I can't do that for you because what works for me is not going to work for you, you know? And the way that I write is not necessarily the way that anybody else is going to write, right? Mm-hmm. You know, like, yes, I can do a book in 5 weeks. It doesn't mean that that everybody should do a book in 5 weeks. Some people will take 5 months. Some people will take a year. And nobody cares. Nobody cares what your process is. What they care about is the end result, which is the book. The person who's reading the book generally cannot tell the difference between the book that was written in 3 months and the book that took 2 years to write.
Yeah.
Because everybody's process is different. If I spent a year writing a novel, I don't know that it would be any particularly better than a book that I wrote in 6 weeks. And I kind of know that because the longest that it's taken me to write an actual book that I've written is 11 months. And if I was to ask you, can you tell, you know, which book of mine feels like it took 11 months to write, you could name one and it probably wouldn't be that book. Right. So you literally can't tell.